Everyone, thank you for your attention this semester. This was a new offering for me. I've never offered cognitive online. It was sort of a last minute decision, and I didn't have anything prepared. And I've been late with videos, much later than I ever said I would be, almost on nearly every chapter, and this one was no exception. So I really hate that, but on the other hand, it takes me a good long time to get the notes together and distill it in a way that is consumable, and to break things up in a way that the videos aren't too long. So I appreciate your patience, and I will say by way of solace that this last test is not cumulative, of course, and the two chapters that are covered, I think, are two of the most accessible chapters, including this last one, which I think is not only the single shortest chapter we've ever had, but maybe one of the more interesting ones. And it has to do with individual differences, which is one of my favorite subjects. I should say that we'll be mentioning gender in the binary sense. This text was written in 18 or maybe 16. I'm drawing a blank. I should know that. But even as little as 6 and 8 years ago, the idea of gender fluidity was not so in vogue, or I shouldn't even say in vogue, I didn't mean to disparage it, but is not as prominent as it is today. So it's the author, Galati, to my knowledge, nowhere in the texts speaks of gender fluidity. It just doesn't acknowledge it. So I thought I'd get that out of the way right away. But let's get into it, shall we? So individual differences in cognition, ability differences, which we really distill down to intelligence, demonstrated differences in mental competence. I think we kind of have an idea of what intelligence is. It might be described as a capacity to learn efficiently, or adaptiveness among the intelligent people you know. They do tend to be adaptive. You know, I happen to have a childhood friend. I'm proud of this, and I don't know why. I had a former female friend more than 30 years ago, in 1991 and 92, who is now the CEO of a Fortune 500 healthcare company. I say female friend, girlfriend. And as I look back when we were very young, 20 and 21 years old, did it occur to me that she would be a CEO of a Fortune 500 organization? No. But on the other hand, as I look back on it, she was quite adaptive. And she was always very, very strong in so many areas, but more than generally intelligent, quite adaptive. And another friend was an early high school, I shouldn't say high school, grade school playmate, I guess you could say. We went to summer camp together. He's the CEO of R.J. Corman Railroad. He's a good number of years younger than me, too, maybe 3 or 4 years younger. And I think the same of him. It didn't occur to me that he would go that far in life, but he's always adaptive. So are they both intelligent? Of course. And I would argue that adaptiveness is the bigger term. Now, in IQ tests, you have all sorts of subdivisions of IQ tests. Verbal comprehension, that's self-explanatory. Sensitivity to problems, syllogistic reasoning, drawing conclusion from premises, your ability to compute numbers and arithmetic. So what's the sales tax on $1 if it's 8% tax? Induction, general reasoning. For instance, algebra uses general reasoning. Associative memory, recalling associated element when given another element. Span memory, basically how many numbers can you remember forwards and backwards. And a few others. I'll let you read over those, but of course they're in the text. But it's amazing. One of the second to bottom one there, perceptual speed. Find instances of a pattern under speeded conditions. Speed is a big predictor of intelligence. Two last ones, spatial orientation. Visually imagining parts out of place and put them into place, and estimating distances or lengths between points. Now, all of these go into the modern intelligence test, which has been around since the late 40s, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, known as the WACE, named after someone named Wechsler. So there's a point that your text makes in the book about intelligence tests that investigators looked at average mental ability in young to kids to late adolescence, and All of them were based on cognitive tasks that previously used with adults, including memory scanning experiments. The authors found that when they controlled for the effects of age, got that out of the way, ability differences were still apparent, especially on the more complicated tasks. And a figure that we'll get to here in a second shows the results of memory scanning tasks as a function of set size, age, and ability level. And you'll note that the older children did have faster reaction times than the younger children, and that within each age group, high ability students were faster than average students. So in this case, even when controlling for age, the bottom line is that there are ability differences within all age levels. In my age, I've already aged quite a bit cognitively at 54, but with you, the listeners, so many of you are so young, you may have a completely different and much faster processing speed than I do. Another point that your text makes in this opening salvo is that their ability differences often come down to verbal differences. Your author did not give me a very good image of this graph, but the bottom line is they asked people to indicate whether two characters were the same. So a capital A and another capital A, or a lowercase a and another lowercase a. The higher verbal people were just a hair faster when there was a physical match, as you can see on the right. Just an eyelash faster, the high verbal people. But there was a bigger difference when we were asked if the capital A and the lowercase a were the same, which suggests that there's some extra dimension of complication there. Being more verbal was a bigger contributor to that processing speed. And there are many verbal differences that emerge. That one suggestion of general intelligence, this factor called G, is a verbal difference. So the name match, are the capital A and lowercase a the same? The verbals people that were known to be highly verbal did that a little bit faster, whereas the physical match, there was less of a difference. Although the graph doesn't depict it very well. I couldn't get a good graph from your author there. Now, speaking of intelligence and ability differences, 30 years ago, a book written by Herrnstein and Murray, and one of those is still alive, I think it's Murray, made a huge splash. Basically, speaking of IQ scores across cultures and races, etc., drew a lot of negative attention. However, generally speaking in the industry, there are some take-home messages that are really beyond technical dispute in the field of intelligence. There is such a thing as a general factor of ability on which people differ. There's one single baseline intellectual strength on which people differ. And it's called G. Now, there are some dissenters from that, but in my humble opinion, that is a correct assertion. I believe that with all my heart. And this was adopted by Herrnstein and Murray in 1994, but others have followed suit. All standardized tests of aptitude or achievement measure this general factor to some degree, but IQ tests are expressly designed for that purpose, measure it most accurately. IQ scores match to some degree, a strong degree, whatever it is that people mean when they use the word intelligent or smart in everyday language. IQ scores are stable, although not perfectly so, over much of a person's life. Properly administered IQ tests are not biased against social, economic, ethnic, or racial groups. So if they're properly administered, that's a huge caveat. We might assume that they're not biased, but I'm not sure that's ever been achieved. And cognitive ability is substantially heritable, no less than 40% and sometimes up to 80%, as Herrnstein and Murray might say in 1994. So they made these assertions. Some of them were pretty explosive and upsetting, especially number 5. There are people that don't believe that. Robert Sternberg can't be convinced of that, as others might suggest. A large part of the reaction to this book stemmed from what critics took to be the author's refusal to present other points of view in a balanced or responsible way. Many critics in particular decried the idea that there's one basic ability called intelligence, measured by IQ tests. Others complained about the assumption that intelligence is fixed and heritable. So these are not fashionable ideas. It's uncomfortable to think that you have a fixed ability that predicts whether you're going to do well in life. I happen to believe there's a germ of truth to it. So if you have a superb athlete, Let's take Michael Jordan versus a handful of people, and none of them have ever bowled before. They've never been to a bowling alley. Might Michael Jordan have an advantage just due to his sheer athletic ability? I would think he would. There's a general athletic factor there. And I think there might be a general intelligence factor. But you're free to disagree because there is controversy. In fact, Howard Gardner is wildly popular, although he is pushing 80 years old now. He has a theory of multiple intelligences. These are things like bodily kinesthetic intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal, mathematics intelligence, arts, etc. And here they are, by the way: linguistic, logical, mathematical, musical, bodily kinesthetic, spatial, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalistic, I think it's supposed to be, and existential. Now, he's added a few over the years since the book came out in 95, I want to say, maybe 97. And he is an SRO speaker. He draws a monster crowd everywhere he goes. I was at the University of Alabama in 1999, 25 years ago, and he was due to speak at 7 p.m., and there was so much overcrowding in that venue where he was due to speak that they delayed it for an hour and found somewhere else for him to go, and everybody walked 100 yards down the sidewalk to a larger place. I mean, just wildly, wildly popular. So Gardner represents an antidote or an alternate idea to G, that you can be good at a couple things and not good at others, or good at 4 things and not so good at 8 things, etc., which is more popular. It's really more comforting to think, well, gosh, I have this sort of intelligence or that sort of intelligence, and not that I have a deficit or a large amount of one thing. So Howard Gardner, wildly popular. He was at Harvard, and he still might be, but I remember him being interviewed on PBS when I was in college, approaching 35 years ago. So this has been a minute, and he's really captured the public's imagination with his books. Whereas the Herrnstein and Murray book really drew these people a tremendous amount of negative attention. And by the way, this is before the internet. 94, maybe the internet existed, but very few people had access to it. And even in that environment, the nightly news shows that were dedicated to speaking about the bell curve and everything else was truly amazing.